So for this final segment today, and you've been a marvelous, this has been a marvelous group for these last day or so, yesterday and today. We have three folks that are going to be giving their perspective on this conference. Phil Kellman, Barry Fishman, and Adam Gamorian. And Phil's going to lead it off.
Well, thank you, Joe. It's remarkable how much the discussion this morning preempted, or at least mentioned, lots of the ideas I was going to bring up today. And that's really good, so I can be brief, but I'll try to throw something in a little spicy and different. I take the cognitive science part of asking about implications for research to focus on questions like, what do the results suggest regarding the potential for improving science learning using cognitive science principles? And what are we learning in a more process mode about how to translate research-based principles into effective practice, and the measurement problem, how to measure that? So here's a bit of an overview. An initial word, the chain, medicine, dose, and response, and then results and trends, subtitled Recognizing Patterns Through the Mist or Noise. And we're going to use the RPI method, which means my comments will be random and possibly incoherent. So the initial word is, and it's on two levels, thanks. First, I'd like to thank Joe and his team and everyone in the Cognitive Science Center and at IES for a great meeting. It's been really informative, both for looking at this center and thinking about efforts more broadly. The other level of thanks is it is so obvious that the National R&D Center for Cognition and Science Instruction has been an enormous effort. It's been a remarkable convergence of expertise and commitment, and it's been very complex, high stakes, and nice to know, it's already clear that it's been very rewarding. So thanks to all of you who have carried out this amazing effort. Maybe I'll give you at the end. Okay. Now we come to the graphic part of the talk. The chain. What do I mean by the chain? I'm not going to say right now. But let's start with a thought experiment. You would like to take principles of cognitive science established in research and use them to attain clear improvements in science learning in middle schools on a large scale. What has to go right for this to happen? Well, the lists I have are filling up several slides, but they're not complete lists. And those of you who have worked on this could elaborate further. But you've got to have sound cognitive science principles that in this context are appropriate. You've got to find good ways to graft them onto an existing curriculum in accord with the mandate for this project. You have to implement them under extreme time pressure. And you're not actually the direct purveyors of the learning. You have to explain the materials and procedures to teachers, a little bit like the game of gossip. You've got to live within the constraints of existing curricula. They will have its own characteristics. And then cope with major teacher and student attrition. Hope that the teacher implementation resembles the intended plan, and hope that the measurement, the assessment, captures learning effects if they're actually there. So this is a daunting enterprise. Any break in the chain could doom the whole effort. And there are a lot of possible problems. I'm not even going to read this list. But I was really impressed. I learned a new phrase this morning, ambient positional instability. The teachers leave. The teachers leave far more than if any of us had been surveyed before this meeting, said, what percentage of teachers do you think leave in the first year? I don't think we would have predicted 50% in Philadelphia and the overall numbers that we saw. I'm going to pick out a couple of these. Students may lack prerequisite skills. You could be completely right about these principles, but we're coming in the middle of their education, maybe even reading in some of these cases. There are unmodified aspects of the curriculum that may limit the upside. Many more of these effects, and what I've listed is not the full list. So maybe a different metaphor. We're trying to pump the magic of cognitive science through pipes that are leaky, and that's a lot of pipes, and it's a lot of bends in the piping, and there's stuff spilling out all the way along. Will we get anything out the faucet at the end? So this is a really daunting effort, and I think the result of the thought experiment is this. If you put a plausible probability of successfully coping with each link in the chain or piece of pipe, and then computed the joint probability with no breaks, you probably wouldn't do this study. So in that light, it's amazing that positive results are showing through in this study. Positive results, as Andy Porter mentioned, on student learning, not on teacher characteristics. Okay, let's turn to the medicine, the dose, and the response. And this will be the bulk of my remarks, and they're a little bit random. First, I think the center implemented a strong array of cognitive science principles. These were well chosen. There were 5 of them really, as Chris Shun elaborated the other day. That 4th one, space testing, is both the testing effect and the spacing effect. And these are some of the best known findings in cognitive science research applied to education. So it's a great selection, but also a lot of things to do in the same project. I'm going to comment a little bit on the medicine, however, and again use this randomized controlled trial analogy to medical research. There's a lot of possible medicines out there, and despite the number used in this study, there's more. And so this study, I want to emphasize, is part of a process. It paves the way for how you do these things and how you get some positive results at the end. So I'm in no way suggesting this center should have done more. But I do want to suggest that it gives us some even diagnoses as well as treatments that may help in future efforts. Today is not the graduation day for cognitive science and science education. The interplay between this kind of work and continuing research will go on. And cognitive scientists are unearthing both the problems, they're doing diagnosis, as well as the treatments. And this kind of effort, I want to emphasize, has both of those characteristics. So I just want to give one example. One of the strongest foci in our field, cognitive science, has been interventions that target declarative knowledge. And this is generally part of what's been called a stereotype about learning. So Bereiter and Scardomelli said, we think of the mind as a container, even as academics and researchers. We're going to put things in it, like facts and procedures, and then later we'll get them out on the test. There's a bit of a verbal learning emphasis to many of the things that we've pursued. And I think maybe Gary Larson said it best. Mr. Smith may be excused, my brain is full. So this is the mind as container. Now, some threads in this project and in our field more generally suggest there's other medicine coming for some of the issues that are addressed even in this project. And that's through mind as pattern recognizer. This is Bereiter and Scardomelli's phrase. In our work, it's the adaptation of perceptual learning methods to help students see structure, to discover new invariants, and to become fluent. So these are domain-specific ways in which information extraction improves. So in the Science Center, a lot of problems have these aspects to them, the processing of diagrams and graphs, to the importance of spatial alignment in graphical representations, the role of comparison. But even here, our first reflex is to address these using kind of declarative knowledge. We're going to explain the diagram, we're going to do explicit alignment, we'll draw some analogies. And I think there are medicines coming that will be a good synergy with these that help students to discover structure, see what's relevant, and become fluent. But these will require complementary, less declarative methods. These threads are in this project. There are some in the visualization, but I think there's the results of this project, and as I'm going to mention later, if we can find out a little bit more detail about what worked and what didn't in the project, and I'm not sure about that, it may pave the way for even stronger interventions. When Daniel Schwartz spoke, he mentioned perceptual learning as the mechanism behind comparisons. And in that vein, it's good to know these kinds of things have their own laws. So there's got to be a lot more interaction and many more examples to get that kind of learning. And this actually might translate into a bit of a dose-response issue in the current work. So some exercises and some explanations are certainly valuable, and I think they proved that in this project. But in general, what I really liked was Jennifer Cromley's segment here that I've reposted. She asks about graphs and visualizations. Why are these hard? These are recently invented cultural products, and like reading, they need to be instructed. And so I would end this with saying how one becomes a fluent reader is different from how one articulates an analogy. So there's trends in this project that make us think that learning activities, rather than, say, developing curriculum, might be a more general umbrella. So the upshot of this example is only one thing, that this is a process. There's a continuing interplay from the research done here and the results that are gotten, but also new opportunities and new diagnoses. So the center is part of a continuing process. Now, a related stray thought. The center used a combination of interventions, and it was intended to do that. Will there be any way to mine some of the data and find out that some things worked well, some things did not? It was mentioned that there are more intense studies within particular domains in this project, so I suspect there's a lot more coming here. Dose and response. There are some real constraints in this project. We have to remind ourselves, this center refurbished an existing curriculum. It did not build a curriculum from the ground up, and the comments from the curriculum developers reflect that. And I do think, I agree very much, there's much more potential in building from the ground up. And this becomes a bit of a dose-response issue. One that I would like to flag is the issue of mastery learning. I don't know if it's a contribution of cognitive science or earlier learning science, but we know that learning criterion is very powerful. In the kind of adaptation of a curriculum here, it was hard enough to find time to do the interventions, much less try to revamp the whole school day. So spaced practice is better than non-spaced, but even better would be individualizing practice using adaptive technology to bring each learner to mastery. Explaining diagrams and giving brief exercises is certainly an improvement, but practicing information extraction and discrimination until it reaches objective criteria would be a stronger dose of the intervention. Well, that wasn't possible here. Mastery learning requires individualizing learning and thus different amounts of time for each learner. It will require a more radical restructuring of the school day. But meanwhile, when looking at the good results of this study, we should realize this isn't the highest dose that we can give of any of these interventions. There were real constraints. Another medicine dose response issue, the measurement. We are in a climate, in a world where we look at standardized tests as an important gold standard, but as cognitive scientists, we have to realize these are evolving, they're not perfect. When I look at standardized tests, more in mathematics, where we do a lot of work, I see individual items that if a student misses it, I don't know what they don't know. The question involves 3 or 4 components of learning. It may be very good for comparing norms across states or districts, but it's not getting at something a math person would really like to see in terms of components, or the formative assessment that we would like to have to go back and address what's missing. So I think cognitive science tests should have a role in standardized tests or in companion tests that get more at components. The need to assess fluency as well as accuracy is something we know from experimental psychology, but it's not much involved with standardized tests. And separate components of learning really have to be unearthed if we're going to address problems rather than just measure them. Okay, finally, results and trends. This is one of Andy's slides, some of the main results in the study. And I really liked Andy's comments this morning, amplifying what the results mean. My summary is not as good as his, of course, but I want to just touch on the effect sizes are encouraging here. The clearest effects were for the unit on cells. And we've had some good discussion about the residual issue of the cognitive science intervention group versus the content professional development group. But those aren't the only reliable results in the study. As Andy pointed out today, cognitive science versus control was a reliable effect, and the data highlight the importance of getting comfortable with this, getting some expertise, doing it a second time. All the trends in the data seem to point in the same direction. So even where things aren't quite as strong as you'd like, they're reinforcing each other in a very good way. Even the perceptual development content, there's some question whether initially it may hurt you, but there weren't reliable differences between the content and control groups. Now I know this kind of logic you don't want to do with statistics, but I think overall the cognitive science intervention group really showed, both in reliable effects and in other trends, that something is shining through. This, again, I want to remind us, we're looking at this through the fog or the noise. I don't know if you can look through noise. You can look through mist. You can look through fog, or the pipe is leaking. How many metaphors are we stacking up here? To get these effects with this kind of teacher attrition, with the implementation issues when you're handing off to people who are not cognitive scientists and didn't initially know the purposes of the study, when students are moving, when teachers have other priorities, when schools have contingencies, these are truly remarkable results, and they encourage me quite a lot, and I hope they encourage everyone in the field. There are, of course, stronger effects for expertise here, and I believe one of the messages cognitive science certainly has for education, if it's not mentioning it, is that the stability issues with teachers moving is not just a problem for research studies. There are expertise effects in dealing with an age group, with content, with the problems students have, with learning bottlenecks, and with strategies for overcoming them. If this simple message isn't known, or if there are ways it could be better implemented, having expertise built by teachers doing the same thing for longer periods of time would be a tremendous improvement in learning. I mean, everything we know would suggest that. There are even more data to look at here, but these results are very encouraging compared to other similar studies, and there'll be further analyses which may tend to show that the better the implementation went, the stronger the results. So overall, it's consistent with viewing real impact here. To sum up then, the effort here, nothing short of heroic. The results positive, and this study will add to our overall knowledge in the process of scaling up and relating principles to practice. And I want to mention, there are so few studies that take a variety of principles and apply them in a real learning center on a large scale. This is like the Wright brothers' first flight. The Wright brothers' first flight lasted 12 seconds. If any of you flew here to get this meeting, you flew longer than that. By the end of that day, they flew 59 seconds. This center's production, these results are a lot more than 59 seconds. So as pioneering work, I think it's very much to be admired. So when we consider the chain of elements involved, especially the center, I think is a notable achievement, a clear success, and really will help all of us in the future.
Thank you.